talk about a project I feel very strongly about, I love very much, and I hope you will too. So this morning I'm going to talk about a particular educational letterpress project in Brazil. I was trying to give you some context for how many times I visited. Enough, I can't quite remember how many, if that makes sense. I first visited in April 2010, which was a short trip. I then went and lived in Brazil for a year. I was a visiting professor at the University of São Paulo. And I visited very regularly when I was living in the city. And most recently, I visited the project this year in June. So I'm just going to talk about the project in three very short ways. I'm going to establish some basic facts, give you a little bit of context. I'm going to show you some work. I think it's extraordinary work. And then I'm going to think about also what, because I think it's the purpose of conferences, not just to tell each other stories, but to think a little bit more critically and encourage some kind of critical dialogue about the kinds of things that we're seeing and doing. Before I do that, I just want to say a few things more generally about the perspective I bring to this subject. So, in a kind of post-colonial context, I'm speaking about a country which is not my own, and that's always going to be a little bit tricky. It's also difficult in terms of the way that the world evaluates countries and kind of developmental rates. I want to make it really clear that I am not talking here about those poor little Brazilians, which is an important thing to say. And also that this isn't about kind of rampaging around the world and plundering other countries for ideas. It was part of a kind of a more complicated cultural and critical exchange. I can only speak for the British media, but I have to say that there is a lot of nonsense written about Brazil. And so in speaking, it's not really about perpetuating those kind of mythologies. Brazil is living there. It's an incredibly complicated, extraordinary country, multifaceted in terms of the levels of complexity. And so this is just what I'm going to present is a tiny part of that complexity. But I want to try to avoid some of the mythology. I'm also presenting work which is not my own, really. I'm talking about a project which is not my own, and again, that's also tricky. And it's something that I have spoken very openly with the people whose project it is about. And they've been very sweet because I've written about them, and they've said that in my writing I've been able to kind of encapsulate a part of what they do, which has been extraordinarily useful to them. So they see it more as a kind of collaboration, which for me is extraordinarily generous of them. But in terms of the real credit here, the credit goes to the guys who run this project. So it's about seeing the work, relating what was seen, and making connections. I think that's really what I brought to the situation with my perspective from being from the UK, being connected to other networks, being aware of other ideas and thinking that was happening and starting to join the dots. So just some general context about where this project is. So this is São Paulo. This is one of the largest cities in the world. That view stays the same, 360 degrees. We're not looking towards the central business district. That skyline just doesn't change. I worked out in the very small hours of this morning when I couldn't sleep, but I actually first fell in love with the city almost 5 years to the day, because it was October the 10th in 2008. And I had visited twice, and I was giving a lecture about my experiences at my university where I teach Central St Martin's in London. And a Brazilian student came up to me at the end, and her aunt works with a project in the city. And she just said this to me. She said, they teach typography classes in a favela. Maybe you'd like to see on your next visit. And there's an invitation if ever there was one. Of course I wanted to see. So who are they? So it's Instituto ATypI. It's a not-for-profit organisation begun in 2001. And they offer learning support for those who are
so marginalised by poverty that access to education and employment is otherwise very, very limited. Here's a map of the city. This is Grand São Paulo and Greater São Paulo and the centre of the city, and A marks the spot of where the project is, so to the northwest. You can see there's some really huge arterial roads very close to them, and they're very important in terms of the area. 90% of the local population to the project live either in a favela or one of the large-scale housing projects, which were the civic attempts to kind of clean them up, were actually just as bad, if not worse. 70% local residents have a close relative either in police custody or involved with drug trafficking, which is endemic in favela life. The top left-hand corner is an area of the city called ATypI. It's the largest food distribution centre in South America. It's like a small city in its own right, and the favelas are just on the outskirts of that. And that's why those arterial roads are very important. So it's a very industrial, quite a bleak landscape. And then those are pictures of the two main favelas which are connected to the project. Most of the inhabitants or the attendees of the project live in either Favela de Linha or Favela de Novo. And really, social problems at this scale disrupt every aspect of life. So the project works with all age ranges. It's not a huge project. So they work with 100 children between 6 and 11 in the mornings. They work with the teenagers, the 12 to 18-year-olds in the afternoon. They work with 60 or so adults, often with babies, in the evenings. And they actually go into the favelas themselves. So they work with about 70 or so mixed-age people in the favelas. And then, in addition to the kind of activities, the educational activities that they run, they offer good simple food. So there's always breakfast, lunch and dinner, and washing facilities. They offer people the opportunity to have a bath and to wash. So in recognition of the very difficult domestic context that people are kind of coming from. The really, really tricky age range are the adolescent years, and particularly the boys, because they really, really struggle with a huge amount of pressure from their families to be earning money and to abandon their education. And that's the age range that I met on a particularly rainy, grey day in São Paulo. And even knowing that, you have to start to wonder really what two old proofing presses, a pattern press at that point not renovated, and a few drawers of type is really going to bring to people's experience of life and what it's really going to be able to do. But every Tuesday between 2 and 4, the members of Shilo Siaza meet in the print studio with printmaker Fabrizio Lopez. Shilo Siaza, the name Shilo comes from Shilo Gravura, which is the Portuguese term for wood engraving, and Siaza is the name of the district where they're from. So they fuse the two together and they have their own little identity called Shilo Siaza. And this is the studio. Actually, they've moved. When I was there in June, they're actually in a slightly different space, but this is the studio space when I first went there. The approach that Akara take, and Fabrizio really is leading this, is it has very strong influences of cooperative. So they are their own little community within themselves, but a key part of the philosophy to the Shilo Siaza group is to consolidate the identity of the individual through participation in very community-focused projects. So they are involved in producing posters for the local community. So the one on the left is a poster for a vaccination clinic, and the one on the right is it's like a promotion for education. So the recognition of the need to be filled, and it says empty or full. So it's partly about finding the positives in life. Is your glass half full or half empty? But it's about kind of the need to be educated. And this connection of printing to the community is, I think, what's key. this distribution of their publications is all kind of part of a process to help recognition of the young people of ATypI within their own communities. They are more or less invisible. So it's about them being seen as individuals capable of having, in the first place, that they have ideas and that they can then transmit ideas. And that gets projected back to their elders and other people in the community. The other key approach is this idea to working with words and to emphasise manual skills as a means of exploring language. So the physicality of the print process is a means for enhancing very, very poor literacy skills. So wood engraving combines with the use of text in projects. So ideas are quite literally transformed into solid and real pieces of communication. So, excuse me, the work. So here they are, one afternoon when I was there. The guy in the cap, Cappy is one of the staff members. So he reads a poem, or the text that they're working on at the time, and they read it, they discuss it, they talk about the meanings of the words if they don't know. And then they're encouraged to draw. So they kind of just respond very immediately to the sense, to the words that they've heard and the words that they've been discussing, and they work only in black and white. So they work with black ink or black pens, and they just draw and draw and draw and draw. They're very lucky in the project that they've done a lot of really nice collaboration, so they have some really nice words to work with. I was there, they were working with the writer and poet Luis Hufaka, on a text that he hadn't published anywhere else as well, Palabras Verdes, which is itineraries from the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. I remember there was a lot of confusion about the word gargoyle. They had no idea what a gargoyle was. So when they've done the drawings, they get put in the middle. It's very democratic. All the drawings just get put in the middle in a pile, and you can see it in the image here. Here they're having a discussion about page format. Everything is decided collectively between them. And they're talking about the feel of the book and what kind of size pages that they want it to have. Once the drawings, they kind of edit them down and they choose the drawings that they think are going to work best for each of the verses or the stanzas of the pages as they've designed them. And then they take to the wood and then they carve the illustrations in wood. And they do all the printing. The guy on the left, Jose, is a retired printer, and he advises them that it's really not him printing with them kind of looking on and doing the old thing. No, they print everything. And when I was there in June, it was very nice because they'd finished and bound the book. So this is the final results. And it was very nice to have seen the process going along and then to see the final results. So this is the cover, and they printed the cover on cloth. These are the end papers. This is a spread. So that's gone through twice, two times. Really, really rich, very strong textural feel. It's another spread. This is Animais. This is a much earlier and one of the earlier and simpler books that they began with. The words here are by a very famous Brazilian poet and a lyricist, because he's in a big band in Brazil, called Arnaldo Antunes. So this is the end papers.
Here it's a wordplay. So the Portuguese for cow is a vaca, Portuguese for a horse is a cavalo, so vacavalho. And so the illustrations are about this kind of play.
Here we have a scorpion and a pine tree. I think what's really struck me when I saw this work was the strength of the composition and the bravery of the relationship between text and image. There's nothing been taken for granted here, and I in all honesty, teaching in a central London art college, I wish some of my students would put something half as inventive down in front of me sometimes. This is a mosquito and a hidden, so it's a play with mosquito and hidden.
This one was actually picked up by a commercial publisher so you can actually buy it in the shops. It's picked up by Editorial 34. It's another of the early small books, and I think it demonstrates something of the really strong material sensibility
with their books. So The River of Insomnia, so here's the cover flattened out, because I just think it's so lovely. And this is one of the spreads. That's a great spread. I mean, I just think the relationship of text and image and the colour, it's just a great spread. And then this is the context for the next image. This is another book, but it also shows, I don't know, the heartbreaking reality that
they can bring to some of their illustrations, because this is an illustration way beyond somebody of maybe 13 or 14 years.
In terms of its powerful, its emotional intensity. The most ambitious book was Parisians, that were working with a text about Alice Ruiz, and this was supposed to be an edition of about 220. I think they kind of lost count around 200, but it's well over 100 pages, and it was printed on a proofing press. And it has a lot more text in it, this one. So what? Very nice things, very nice work, very nice project. But what are the wider significances of this, if any? And what are the maybe things to think a little bit about? There is a term which is often referred to when you're thinking about Brazil, which is called favela chic. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So we have a lot of very famous fashion brands, having people in the favelas working for them, producing things, which is all for the good of the poor little people in the favelas, but it's not really that good, actually. So it's kind of tricky territory, something to be mindful of in terms of the ethics. But 100% ATypI is about facilitation and education and not exploitation. And there is undoubtedly an unaffected immediacy to this work, but I think there are some wider resonances beyond the immediate context of the project. There is certainly a very specific cultural resonance, the community-focused emphasis, and the particular technique of woodcuts connects Sheila Siaza and their work very strongly within a much older tradition of literature de cordel, which is a very small publishing phenomenon from the northeast of Brazil. Began in the early 20th century, were very, very small, tiny books, printed locally for the dissemination often of political ideas, sometimes scientific ideas, but it's kind of very small educational, like little tracts, hand-printed, often with very small presses. Often printed not so well, but very beautiful.
These are two covers by one of the maestros, Jorge Borges. On the left, the Portuguese man and the alligator, and on the right, the truck and the coffin. Quite alarmingly, the body doesn't seem to be actually staying in that coffin. And then you realise that these are cordel para crianças. These are books for children. And these are some of the woodblocks of Borges. So you can see there is something of the strength of the wood cutting and something of the same sense of line, which infuses the Sheila Siaza work too. I think there's a wider educational resonance, and I think that the way that Fabrizio talks about why they are working in the way that they are working, why they are working with type, is really interesting. And I think if there's one thing that needs to happen is the dialogue around letterpress in educational contexts needs some enrichment. He articulates very clearly what they do and why they do it. And for me that was just really refreshing to hear, because I am so bored of discussions about letterpress where it's just like, well, it's slow and it's so nice and it smells great. And it's just like letterpress is therapy for stressed out digital designers, and well, that's very nice, but we have to kind of get beyond that, because that's transient and that's fashionable as well, and actually to think longer term. I think there's a very strong practice resonance
Letterpress is very fashionable. A lot of people have presses, but actually they don't have so much to say. And you can see that by the number of people that borrow quotes or lyrics and print stuff, and then it gets put in a frame, and it goes on somebody's living room wall, and that's very nice too. But actually, again, it's about trying to think about purposes and future directions which are beyond the fashionable and beyond the lifestyle magazines. And while the obsession with this kind of retro aesthetic in letterpress is one I often find extraordinarily frustrating, I have to say that reinventing letterpress has got to be the most unfortunately named book ever. And for me, one of the things that's key to Sheila Siaza is something which is really, really old-fashioned. It's perhaps the simplest and the oldest of typographic ideas. The connection of a printing press to the very real voices of community. So for me, it's not the niceness of the people, they're lovely, but it's not the niceness of the people, nor the sort of authenticity and the immediacy of the visual aesthetic of the work. It's great, but it's not that makes Sheila Siaza or its outcomes so valuable. Really for me, it's this connection between the press and a community of people that have something to say. It's a connection which affords young people, often living in the direst of circumstances, the opportunity to prove to everyone else, and perhaps most significantly to themselves, that they have something worthwhile to say. Thank you.
We have time for maybe one or two questions. Anyone?
Hi, that was great. At one point you mentioned, just kind of in passing, that usually the printing is really poor, but you still think that it's beautiful. And I'd be curious to hear, like, outside of the scope of how letterpress is nice and tactile and everything like that, like what it is about that you think, you know, if you saw that anywhere else, if it would be different, or
Actually, I don't think their printing is so poor.
I think the way that they print their books is normally pretty good. They don't do that half-ink kind of thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that thing, but it's a thing. But actually their printing is pretty good, and I think the crudeness maybe of the illustration sometimes, I think what I like is that the books are conceived as spreads and layouts, and so I don't really think that illustrations as being especially crude, because they're always in the context of something which holds together as a whole, as a book. So the whole thing has been put together and thought through in that way.
Is there an aspect of talent spotting to what you're doing, and or the encouragement of scholarships to fancy design studios in Sao Paulo or design colleges in New Zealand and around the world? Is that aspect?
No, that's the talent spotting. And it makes me nervous just because I worked with Fidalgo before, and a trend spotting agency was there before, and that's one of the things about the kind of that kind of slightly colonial position really just makes me nervous. And ATypI themselves are very much, it's an educational program, so people have gone on from that program to higher education, and for them that would be the ultimate success. So it's not about that people go and work in niche boutiques or anything, because actually that doesn't really exist. But they do leave the project and go into more full-time and higher education. And there are some trackable students that you can take through. And for them, that is just a dream come true, that they've taken somebody that had no hope of an education in that way, and that now they do. And definitely their profile and their work and the quality of their work has opened up doors, so people are looking at them and taking them more seriously, I think. So I think it's opening up opportunities for them, yeah.
Okay, I think that does it. Oh, one more quick question.
Thank you very much. A really great talk. I was wondering, I For me, like maybe typography and book design is much about being about enabling communication, also about organisation. And I wonder if you would have a few words to say about how maybe organisational structures in relation to what you did or saw.
For sure, Akaya had that, and that's a key thing about they have a very rigid timetable, and it's one of the reasons that they don't. I said that they go out to the favelas and work with some of the people there is because at that point those people don't have enough structure in their lives to be able to attend Akaya regularly because they just don't have that kind of organisational structure. So they go out, and their first point of outreach really is to work with people in the community to help them with that. And it's one of the key things. Like I said, I highlighted food and the opportunity to wash, but actually the underlying rhythm of how you structure a day and how you arrive in a place regularly at the right time is fundamental to the whole operation of the whole place. So yeah, thank you, it's key.
Okay, thanks so much, Catherine.